Officially, the Slavic tribes began converting to Christianity in the medieval times, but many pagan customs were preserved among peasants. Today there are pagan revivals across Europe, and the Slavs are no exception. This group of people being rained on in Poland is called Gromada Białorza, and they're waiting for the rain to stop so they can celebrate the coming of summer.
Czy przyjdzie do mnie, czy nie? Wołanie usłyszmy, wołanie usłyszmy, wołanie usłyszmy, wołanie usłyszmy. Ach wodo ma, w tobie nadzieja cała, że chłopca mego znasz i jemu wianek dasz, że chłopca mego znasz i jemu wianek dasz.
There were many gods in the Slavic pantheon. The main three are Perun, who is the god of the storm and the sky. His name comes from that of the Proto-Indo-European thunder god, Perkunos, whose name is clear in his Lithuanian cognate, Perkunas. These gods are all like the Nordic god of thunder, Thor, whose other name, Fjörgyn, comes from Perkunos as well. Perun is the principal deity of the Slavic people. Svarog is a smithing god, like the Roman Vulcan. He is compared in the Hypatian Codex to the Greek god Hephaestus, and it says he is father of the sun god Dagspog and the fire god Swarajik. This trinity is reflected in the ancient Vedic texts of India, in which lightning, fire and sun, that is Indra, Agni and Surya, are all brothers. Veles is a dark god, whose mythic roles are cognate with those of the god's enemies in other pagan religions. Yet Veles was honoured by the Slavs. He is the god of the underworld, Naui, and of wisdom and magic. Because of his patronage over cattle, a symbol of abundance, he is called a horned god. The ritual has begun. First, the priests delineate the holy space by marking a circle in salt. The priest's wife, Agnieszka, offers the sacrificial loaf to each member of the congregation so that they can imbue it with their intentions. The loaf is then burned in the sacrificial fire as an offering. Toasts are made to the gods with a horn of mead, and libations are poured onto the fire. Clouties are tied to a green bough in honour of the summer's arrival. And offerings of grain are poured into a pit and buried. The historic sources on Slavic paganism are sparse, but most information comes via the 12th century primary chronicle. However, unlike in Western Europe, the Slavic peasants were not really Christianized in medieval times. Therefore, we can learn a lot about Slavic paganism from accounts of folk customs among peasants as recently as the early modern era. V.G. Vlasov quotes the respected scholar of Slavic religion, E.V. Anichkov, who, regarding Russia's Christianization, said, "It was said, those who will violate the treaty, let them have no help from God or from Perun. May their shields not protect them, and may they die from their own swords, from arrows and other weapons of their own, and let them be slaves in the next life." To be a slave in the next life implies that they could reincarnate as another person. This belief persisted among Christian peasants even recently, as we can see in these accounts of Belarusian folklore from Michael Fedorowski in 1897. "Curious where God did get these souls. Oh, God will take the soul out of one body and put it in the other. That's all. God does not give people their own souls. He will only take one out of someone and put it in the other." Who are the Slavic people? Another thing that distinguishes Slavs from Western Europeans is they have regional genetic continuity reaching further back into history. This is because the Indo-Europeans of the corded ware culture who replaced many of the people in Neolithic Europe were descended from Eastern European hunter-gatherers. In June this year, Science Poland reported that a soon-to-be-published study will reveal the antiquity of the Polish people. It says, there are already first conclusions from the research of the team from the Biobank Laboratory and the Department of Anthropology. The researchers believe that in the case of the population living in Kujawi, there was a surprisingly strong genetic continuity, dating back to the time of the first farmers, 7.5 thousand years ago. It seems that we are dealing with an interesting genetic continuation in the population living in Kujawi from the early Middle Ages to the 19th century. The roots of these populations probably reach the Neolithic.
The original Proto-Slavic people existed a long time ago, but they do exist today in the form of modern Slavic speakers here in Poland, and the Russians, the Belarusians and the Ukrainians. Basically the Northern Slavs, because they're genetically almost identical to the Proto-Slavic people, the Balto-Slavic people. The Southern Slavs from the Balkans are actually, they're a bit different because during the Middle Ages and the Huns, they left a power vacuum in the Balkans, and that allowed the Northern Slavs to impose their culture and language on the people in the Balkans from the 6th century onwards. And today the Serbs and Bosnians and what have you, they speak Slavic languages, but they have maybe about 20% input from that Slavic invasion. So the rest comes from indigenous Balkan farmer, so they're much more south-shifted, they're more closely related in some ways to Greeks, so they're kind of like Greek Slavs mix in a way. The Proto-Slavic homeland is the European plain. The European plain is this area here now in Poland and going further west a bit into Germany. And that's also the homeland of the corded ware culture. And the corded ware culture of the late Neolithic and Bronze Age it's the culture for most of the Indo-European peoples we know today, including the Slavic people and the Germanic people. So it's important to understand the corded ware and their role in history, to understand the diversity of paganism in Europe that happened in the medieval times and the forms that we now practice today. So the corded ware culture languages must have been closely related. Well, all these ones derive from a common source, the ones that we have today, and they influence each other later. So the Slavic languages are quite influential on others, and other languages have been influential on Slavic. For example, linguists think Germanic is closer to Balto-Slavic than Celtic, which is interesting because the Celtic homeland is basically Austria original, and a lot of Germany was Celtic speaking, so you would imagine there would be a heavy influence from, well, it would be more Celtic, but it isn't. It's closer to Balto-Slavic. And the Gothic language of the Eastern Germanic peoples that actually has more Celtic loanwords than other Germanic languages. So that's interesting. It tells us something about the relationship of Germanic people to Celtic people, and even Anglo-Saxons who invaded a Celtic country don't have very many Celtic words. In English today we don't really have hardly any Celtic words. But Slavic has many Germanic words. Germanic words like Hanso is Slavic words, meaning a band of warriors or cohort. That's in Germanic, and that become in Slavic Zosa, which means robbery or trap, and Finnic Kansa, which means people or nation. You got the Germanic word chleba, meaning loaf or bread, and that became Slavic word zleb, meaning loaf of bread. Germanic kuninga, meaning king, becomes Slavic kniec, which means a prince or ruler. I might have mispronounced these words, I'm so sorry if I do. Germanic nauta, meaning cattle, becomes Slavic nuta, meaning cow or cattle. But most of the loanwords identified in Proto-Slavic come from Germanic languages, of all the loanwords in that early Slavic time, long before Christianity. And the other main contributors are Iranian, Celtic and Turkic. So some of the words, like in other cultures influenced by Slavic, for example, Sami, which the indigenous people up in, or so-called indigenous people in Scandinavia, that word is of Slavic origin. And so is Suomi, the word for the Finnish. Balto-Slavic, the language from which Slavic and Baltic languages derive, is phonologically closer to Indo-Iranian than to Germanic due to areal influences of Iranic speakers. But there was 100% certainty that there was extensive Balto-Slavic influence on Finnish, and Finnish also has these Iranic words coming in. Iranic words entered Finnish much earlier than the Slavic words entered the Finnish language, which indicates that the Slavs already inhabited the region between Scythia and Germania in the first millennium before Christ, or the Proto-Slavic speakers, because the route of the Finnic peoples through the Iranic-speaking regions and into Scandinavia, they must have passed. Sorry? Yeah, it's evidence that this region between Germania and Scythia has been Slavic since very great antiquity. The Slavic religion was heavily influenced by their neighbouring Iranic religion as well. Most likely, when I say Iranic, probably the Scythians. And that's why they say bog instead of the Proto-Slavic word for God would have been dievos, but bog is of Iranic origin. And there's also the later Germanic influence from the west via Ostrogoths and the Kievan Rus, of course. You'll probably know about the Rus. Allegedly, it's of Germanic name, deriving from a word meaning people who row. So according to the primary chronicle, the Rus were a group of Varangians who lived along with other groups like the Swedes and the Jutes on the other side of the Baltic Sea in Scandinavia and as far as the land of the English and the French. The Varangians were first expelled, then invited to rule the warring Slavic and Finnic tribes of Novgorod. The Rurik dynasty was founded in the 9th century, lasting until the 17th, and when it initially started, that was the introduction of some Germanic gods and Germanic pagan worship among the Slavs at the same time of Slavic pagan worship, until there was a rebellion and Vladimir restored the cults of the Slavic gods, erecting some big statues for the Slavic gods in 980, and that lasted for about 9 years until he converted to Christianity. And then the great statue of Perun, as perhaps you know, was thrown into the river. But I wonder, because there may have been a precedent for that wasn't just iconoclastic, there may have been a symbolic, because there are certain Indo-European rituals of ritually drowning an idol.
If you want to learn more about paganism, then check out some of the other videos on this channel, Survive the Jive. I do streams every other Sunday night, and I cover topics like Nordic paganism, the Indo-Europeans, ancient genetics, and I also make proper videos on location all around the world about folklore and paganism and history. You can support this channel on Subscribestar or Patreon, and then you get access to exclusive content which nobody else can see. I'm Thomas Rousel, and this is Survive the Jive.